Welcome to Living Like You Mean It. And today I am with my good friend, John Henderson. John, I guess I would call him a Navajo cultural expert and educator. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
And I'd like to first introduce you to folks by you telling them a little bit about yourself. Just maybe where were you born?
I was born in halfway between the community of San Agustin, New Mexico, which, by the way, is no longer called San Agustin, but given the original Navajo name, San Agustin is the word in the place. And also from there, between there and a place called Table Mesa. And then in Navajo, it's called Biltahaskan. Biltahaskan is more of a, really in the desert area of the reservation there. And so I was born somewhere. My record shows that I was born on the 24th of November. It was the year 1945. And so my mother, I was born in not in a hogan, but outside of the place where we lived. It was normally when children were born at that time, they were born either inside if the weather wasn't permissible. If it was a warm time of the year, usually you were born in in a place where you threw your ashes and all the debris that you don't use.
Okay.
And so it was a kind of like it's not a trash pile, but it was a place where you used charcoal and things that were burned.
Okay.
Usually in place. So.
And so
in the Navajo way, it's called Kleshchinaka, meaning where you put your ashes.
Okay.
And so they did a tripod for the mother to hold onto a belt in such a way that you didn't have babies laying down. You had babies kneeling practically, and you supported yourself by holding onto a belt that was hanging from above.
Oh, wow. So now where you were born, is that area considered now part of the Navajo reservation?
It is on the reservation, and so when my mother started feeling movement, I guess my dad went ahead and contacted two of my grandparents. My grandparents, one that lived about 2 miles from where we were, and the other one lived about a mile. And so they came, and both of them were on donkeys. Those ladies used to like riding donkeys, so they came. And when I came out, I guess one of my sister was the midwife, I guess, in a way, since my grandmothers weren't there yet. But after I came out and I was wrapped in cloth, I guess, one of the grandmothers came from the top of the hill and was hollering, "Well, do we have a baby yet?" And then my sister, I guess, shouted at him and said it was a boy. And then the other grandmother was coming across the ravine on the other side, and she was hollering about the same thing. And when the donkeys bellowed out, one of them started bucking, and she fell off. And she used to tell me that from time to time, she says, "You made me fall off my donkey."
So you were responsible for her falling off her donkey.
Very much.
From birth. So now you're in the Navajo Dine culture. There are clans, and so now what clan are you from?
The Navajo society is a matrilineal society. Anything that we say is based from my mother's side of the family.
Right.
My mother owns the herd. My mother resides at the place where she was where she has her sheep,
Right.
and that's where my father had to move to.
Okay.
So everything that's kind of owned was by my mother.
Okay.
And so, if and should have my father left my mother, then my father would probably just take a horse or two, and that was about it.
Uh-huh.
All the things belong to my mother, and that's the Matrilineal Society.
And what clan?
My clan is the Mini Hogan, in the sense of how we translate the word Mini Hogan, and in the Navajo way we call it Ho Wan Clan, meaning many houses.
Uh-huh. And explain to, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but explain to, for those people that might be listening and know nothing about Navajo culture, what a hogan is.
A hogan is a house. They call it Ho Wan. It's the English version of saying Ho Wan, meaning hogan. And so it's a home. It's not a wooden house or brick house, squared corners, but it's usually round. And so I'm from that clan of the Mini Hogan, and I'm born to the clan they call the Mexican clan. They call it Nakaitane. And so my father was a Nakaitane, and that's how I introduced myself.
Okay.
Now, my maternal grandfather was from the Tango people. They call them the Tango people. They call it
the tangled
people.
Tangled people.
It's
Okay.
Like a piece of
like
rope
a mixture of.
a mixture of different things.
Okay.
So he in the Navajo way we say Tatnesani, and that was a clan in which he was from. My grandfather on my father's side, paternal grandfather, is there's two ways they say. One is if you're not really educated into the clan system, you'd say red running into water, which is how you say it. It's the word is Tachini, meaning the red running into water. It's kind of like saying that.
Right.
May I close? Okay. So that was one way of saying it, but as history shows it, as we talk about history in itself, we come to find out that his clan was named after a deity that had red color on his forehead.
Oh, okay.
Around the hairline.
Okay.
So when you say Tachini, Ta is 4. Chini meaning red. So he had red on his forehead.
Okay.
And so they were named after that clan.
Okay. So now, what was your? I knew you have a Dine Navajo name. What was that?
The names that were given to you in Navajo were what people considered as war names. They were all in terms of warriors. When you said that, the ladies are the girls would be Ba, meaning going into war. They're going, moving. And the men would be, or the boys would be, Hashke would be the first word, or somewhere in there, meaning commander, or the person in a high-ranking person in the military.
Okay.
And so sometimes your name was given to you because of your grandparents or somebody that they really look up to. And so mine was Hashkeya Deswat, meaning he went past the commander. In the sense of a war, I guess. I don't know. It can be interpreted many ways, like the guy that does things his own way, or Doesn't listen to anybody, commanding officer or whatever it is. No, you have
got an independent streak in you.
Yes. In my case, I think I kind of, in my years of study and looking at the words there, and so I wonder how they gave me that name. But I come to think of myself as a person not always traveled the beaten path. I mean, I want something a little different now. Even when we took the sheep up the mountains, I kind of didn't. The sheep were on the trail most of the times, and my sister or my dad would be either up in front or in the back, but I would be somewhere either above or below the trail, chasing those goats back on the trail if I want to.
Right.
But it was, to me, it was kind of monotonous to be on the trail. I mean, walking and then doing some of those things, or riding a horse. But I wanted to see what's on the other side or right on here.
Right. So now you grew up on the reservation, and when did you leave the reservation for the first time?
When I left the reservation, I really didn't really determine or make plans to do that, for a good reason, because one of my sister, her name is the second oldest, her name is Virginia. Virginia was married to my brother-in-law. His name was Tom Nelson. Tom Nelson was a veteran of World War II, and so somewhere after his discharge from the military, he got himself a job with the civilian part of the military, and so he worked at a supply center in Clearfield, Utah. It was called the Naval Supply Center there.
Okay.
And it just about a stone throw away from there was the Hillfield Air Force Base. So having him work there, he kind of like knew what was happening when there was more supplies coming in. He says there's something happening and all this, and so he kind of got information for him. Well, anyway, he worked there, and so my sister we live in a neighborhood there where former workers and also military personnel used to live. It's a little place in Hillfield. They had apartments in rows and connected together. And so we lived there. I went to school in Shiprock 1 year. And I vaguely remember some of the things that we'd done or did. I don't remember ever, when I went to school, knowing the English language at all. But when I got to Clearfield, Utah, I think a lot of things start setting in ways, because number one, I went to West Jordan Elementary School. And for some reason, I was kind of a different person there because of the color of my skin.
Well, I was going to say, were you the odd man out? Were you the...
Yeah, probably. And so, then, as a couple more years later, I noticed that we had immigrant workers and their children went to school there, and they thought I was Mexican, so they spoke to me in Spanish, Hispanic way, and then I told them I was Indian, and they laughed. Say something in Indian. So I would tell them, Yate, and they laughed. Said, how was that again? And so I had friends all the way around, and it was fun going to school there.
Right.
And I spent about 2 years or 3 years there, and then came back on the reservation. When I came back to the reservation, it was hard for me to talk the language I had, because some of them I did remember, some I didn't. I
Right.
didn't really know how to convert. So when I went back to school again here on the reservation in Shiprock, I had to relearn a lot of the words and how to say the sentences and that. And so and I don't know how long it took me to relearn that. It must have been a couple months or so.
Right.
Because I could pick it up real easy.
Uh-huh.
But that's how I lived at that time, and then seeing what was out there and having to be in a boarding school was two different things.
Was the boarding school experience, what kind of experience was that for you? Was that a good experience or a bad experience?
It was just an experience. I guess it was good and bad. The bad part of it was that you don't have your family with you, and it was hard to talk about different things in your school because the people you were in the dorm with were in the school, so the only thing you had in common was to play and different things that you did. But I miss my parents, and I miss the open space, and I also miss the ice cream that Clearfield, Utah had provided for me, and I could just walk down to the gas station and buy an ice cream, come back, or the ice cream truck would come by.
So you liked your experience in Clearfield?
I did.
Yeah.
And it was in those days when kids would run. We had one guy that was used to.
How old were you when you were in Clearfield?
It must have been 7, 8, 9, somewhere in that area. And so it was a time of the year when kids used to look forward to seeing the trash man come by, and he was hilarious. I mean, he'd do funny things, show us tricks and all that. So we kind of followed him as they pick up trash along the subdivision there, and a whole group of kids would come, and he would, what side of my pocket has candy in it? And everybody would try to guess, and he wouldn't have any idea. You would pull it out of his ears or wherever it was, you know.
Right.
So it was a fun thing to learn to know that.
Right. Well, now you spent that time in Clearfield, and then you went back on the reservation, and I guess it was sometime at that time that you and Emma probably met, and you married your wife Emma. And what brought you? We're sitting in John's man cave in his shop outside of his home, in the little. It's not even really a town. It's more or less a village of Zithnal-Dithli, which sits at the foot of the Turning Mountain, which is a very sacred site in the Dine culture. And so I'm interested to know what brought you here to this spot. What got you interested in education and the cultural experience and wanting to be able to give back to others is through that cultural.
Going through the BIA's boarding school, learning about different things, and then somewhere along the line there, TV started to show up in the boarding school, and it was a very exciting time for the kids. And for me, I had the experience of looking at a TV before that time, and it was really nothing that much newer, but the idea was it expanded from a small 18-inch to a bigger screen.
Right.
And that was my experience, and I kind of knew a lot of the things that most of the kids didn't really know, and maybe some of the other kids I went to school with had the similar experience that I did. But we spent 9 months at the school and spent 3 months at home. And when we went home, and I look forward to it a lot because I had pets like dogs, several dogs, you know. Hung up with the dogs a lot when we were herding sheep, and we hunted rabbits and everything else with it. Alone and doing doing that, being 11, 12, 13 years old, you already had chores to do. You were part of the help for the family in providing services. So my job was to take care of the sheep and the horses. And when my brother was there, he took care of the horses and the cattle. But it was later on in the year when all of a sudden he left, and not knowing too much about it, he was in the military. He joined the Marine Corps right after high school. He went to school in Intermountain, Utah. He went from there into the military and served in the Southeast Asia. He took that tour.
So
it was peacetime.
In peacetime.
So he was there, and when he was there, I had the chore of taking care of the sheep, the horses, and the cattle. And so it didn't really bother me at the time, but as time went on, as I got a little older, it was a half-tooth thing. It was a thing to look after the dumb sheep. Now the cattle, why can't they look after themselves? And by the time when I hit 16 and 17, it was really frustrating for me because I saw what it was out there. I mean, in Utah, I know what's going on in Farmington, but I wasn't part of it yet. I mean, I wanted to be part of the limelight type of situation. There were good things happening.
Right. You
had movies there. You had places to go.
You were ready to spread your wings a little bit.
Yes, a little more. So I made a point, and being like my brother, I was going to go ahead and join the military and forget about all the dumb sheep and all the animals that were out there, and look to see where the world. Take a tour around the world, so to speak. In fact, I kind of like the idea of making a military career. Well, that didn't pan out at all. And when I was in high school, that's when I met my wife there, and we talked and found a lot of things that we done and shared our lives together, compared our lives and some of the things we were doing. And it sounded like, I would feel comfortable in that situation. There was probably a lot of support at that time for each other. And so we both agreed on the idea of why don't we make our lives together. And so when I talked to my mom about it, she didn't think it was a good idea at the time.
Your mom didn't think it was a good idea, huh?
No, she didn't think it was a good idea. I mean, they already knew what life is about. Life was hard,
Right.
And for me, it was like, it's on the next curve, and I'll just go ahead and take it as it goes, you know.
So they were just looking out for you.
Yes. And so she wasn't too agreeable. But by that time, my dad passed away in '64. The year I was graduating in February, and we buried him on Valentine's Day. And so a lot of the things that I learned from him must have been stored somewhere back of my mind in packages and labeled, I guess. I didn't use, it was there until I got back home and I graduated from high school. And military was the thing that I was thinking about. Then I got the word back from Albuquerque that I didn't pass the physical, so that shot me out of the saddle. And the next thing was, I guess the next thing is I'll just go ahead and go to college and do this and that. And so I kind of played with that game there, and plus the idea that I needed somebody that would understand me or to see a better way of things that she and I would share. And so that's how I got to know Emma that much more, and so we decided to settle down. That's what we did.
Right.
And so
somewhere along the way now you found an interest in teaching.
it didn't come to me that time. It was the idea that if I stayed with the college work and hopefully I wanted to become some sort of an engineer. Don't know where it was, but it was an engineer.
Okay.
And that's what I wanted to do, and so I kind of fiddled around with classes here and there, at the same time help with my mom and help my in-laws' place up at Smith Lake near Theru, New Mexico. So, but before that time, after we got married and everything else, would you believe my mom kicked me out of the house?
She kicked you out?
It was a process of learning, I guess. I can say that because I say it in a way that how I must have felt at that time. It was like, you no longer need to be here, you need to be with Emma's family, you need to work over there. So grab all your belongings out of here. I got plans to use that space there type of thing.
Okay.
And so that took place, and but before that time, I think going back to the summer without my dad was really probably the hardest time in my life, because anything that I wanted to do in terms of decision making, it was always like, okay, Dad, how I have this thing happening. How is it? How should it be?
You wanted his input.
Yes.
His blessings, his input, his recommendations.
And then I would go from there and confirm it with my mom.
Okay.
If I did something that my father would suggest, and without my mother knowing it, my mother felt out of place. So I had to go and do that.
So I take it you and your father were close growing up?
And if mother said something, and just to get approval from my dad, I would say, well, my mom says this and that. He never really pushed anything to counteract this as well. What are you waiting for? Do it, you know? And he kept that to himself. I guess he was, whether he agreed with my mother or not, that was not optional for him. He just said, do it.
So was culture important to him? Did he share with you a lot of stories and things growing up?
While we were growing up, he shared stories and things that we call guidance, I guess, today. It's about things immediately, things that happen in our community or things that happen within the family. He used it as a lesson. And the do's and the don'ts and the things that happen. And every time when I went to boarding school, we had this little talk with either my mom present or he did that without her, or she would do it. And he used to say, anything you do out there somewhere, it's going to reflect on us. So learn to use what you have that is right. Make those decisions. And all this time, I have a cousin, or in the Navajo way, it's my nephew. And he's a few months younger than I was, maybe about 2 or 3 months. And we had and boys had the same interests all the time, you know.
Sure.
And I was supposedly the older and the wiser of the two. Plus, there's about 3 or 4 more in the local community there that we were with. There are some of my other sisters from my aunt. They're actually cousins, but they say it's your sister. So their children were the ones too, and then all children had something in common. You know, we'd do something. Get together and do things, and then if our parents heard about it, and we get scolding from them.
Yeah.
And it's always been like my mother would used to say, well, you're a lot older than he is, how come you'd be sensible to do that?
You're supposed to be setting an example.
Yes.
I think we've all heard that one before.
And so, as through the years came, and my nephew or cousin would say, "Hey, I got this thing going. Why don't we do this and that?" And I know it's wrong, and I said, "No, let's not do that. Let's not." And no, nobody will know. We'll do this and do it. See, this is this way, you know. And it gets to be so convincing. Yeah.
Relative peer pressure.
Yes. And so, when whatever it is, the incident would happen, and my mother would hear about it, and I'm the guy that's holding the whole bag on me. I'm the guilty person. I get the axe. So. And I keep telling my nephew, and you guys do it, I don't want no part of it. But yet somehow I'm in it.
Right.
But that was the way it was when we were growing up. But back to my dad again, his teachings were really firm. There was a way that my mom and my dad worked things. If you gave too much pressure to my mom had enough of you, she would just tell you, go see your dad. And that's what you don't want to hear.
Right.
And there was nothing said about it or anything. You go see him, and then he would say, look at you, and say, what do you need? And you would say something like, well, my mom sent me over. And then he would reach into his pocket and get his pocket knife out and says, go get you one of those willows down there, cut you out a willow down there in the wash. And so with some reluctance, you kind of played around or slowly go into the wash to get a willow that's probably going to be used on you once. And you have these feelings like repentance. Oh gosh, if there was a way that I could just say I won't do it again, and I would go without food or whatever it is for
to get out of this whipping.
So that was what it was, and so. And actually, one time we did that with my. This is the thing we did with my nephew. We actually cut down some willows that were says which one hurts the least and which was the worst, at different sizes. We whipped each other with it. All of them hurt like crazy. They was no different.
Oh man. Well, let's take a break, and we'll come back and have some more conversation.